Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the best MMA minds in the world. This week, we got Danny Segura. He's back, always running Sofla. We pinned him down for this week's SBC. Goes from MMA Junkie Radio, originally from the mean streets of Santa Ana, now in Sin City. And, of course, it's Mike Bond in Toronto, just celebrated his 31st rotation around the sun. Swears he's rehydrated and ready to go. Cold coffee on the ones and twos. Let's get to it. All right, fellas. This past Saturday night, Ketlen Vieira defeated Holly Holm via split decision in the main event at UFC Fight Night 206. Afterwards, as Viera was talking about her title aspirations, I can only imagine that Holm was doing the exact opposite. Where does Holm go from here? 4 minutes are on the clock. Danny, you're leading things off.
Yeah, this is a tough one for Holly Holm because it seemed like if she was going to make a statement and really campaign for a title shot, she needed to do something now. But at the same time, I kind of want to remain a little bit hesitant to say that she's done because, although she is 40 years old, we got to look at like the complete package and we got to look at what we see inside of the octagon. Joel Romero was 40 years old and he was arguably probably the second best middleweight during his early 40s. So I think Holly Holm still looks great. I think a lot of people saw that she won the fight and disagree that Ketlen Vieira shouldn't have been the rightful winner there. So I think her stock didn't really take a big hit despite having an official L on her record. So I think, if she just stays consistent, I think a year from now, around this time next year, we could be talking about her potentially fighting for a title if she racks up 2 more wins, 3 more wins, obviously, if she stays active. And look, the division is a bit on a change, right? We don't know what's going to go down between Amanda Nunes and Juliana Peña. So if Amanda Nunes were to take another L, all of a sudden things open up because now the champion, doesn't have a win over her. So we'll see what happens there. Also, Mike made a great point prior to us shooting this that, she does have 1 fight left. So if she wants to explore other options as well, I think down the line, I think that'd be a great option as well.
Yeah, nice pull with the reference to Yoel Romero. I was even thinking Frankie Edgar, man. She's just someone that's always hanging around. Goes, how about you? What do you think here?
Well, right now, I don't know that there's a clear path for Holly. She's accomplished a lot. She's fought just about everyone she can. But if I'm her, I take that position of just being that person that's always ready, right? Maybe you jump in if somebody gets hurt, get right back in the line. I think that might be her avenue right now because I think we all know she did look pretty good in the fight, but she's slowed down a little bit, and I think she's more towards the end of her career. So I would do something like that. Maybe as far as what could be next for her, the loser of the Aspen Ladd fight with Sarah McMahon, those are 2 pretty good names. I think regardless, it's a long road back. So what I would do is maybe focus on a little wild card. How about if things don't go well for Miesha Tate at 125 and she wants to come back to bantamweight, I think that's a fight that maybe we could play over again because, look, there was a clear winner in the first fight. We get it. Miesha Tate won that fight. But she was losing up until then. And I think that's something that the UFC could possibly sell. And if Holly wins that rematch, then you have the possible trilogy. So I think that's something like a little jewel that could be waiting for her later on in the future should things not work out. But right now, I think you got to be the girl that's ready for anything.
Good stuff, Goes. I was at the Apex and I saw almost a Miesha Tate moment. Remember, she fought off a choke from Viera. Close call, but she got out of it. But anyway, Mike, finish up. What do you think here?
Yeah, I think Holly Holm's in a tricky spot. I mean, going back to the thing, she now has 1 fight left on her UFC contract. To be coming off a loss now instead of 3 straight wins, where she'd obviously have more leverage to ask for specific fights, specific money, things like that. That's kind of gone, and that's, at the fault of the judges. So feel bad for her in that regard, but I do still think her options are open. I mean, if she wants to re-sign a new deal into her 40s and keep toiling in the UFC, trying to get these critical wins for a title shot, sure. But the better options for her at this stage of her career might actually be outside of the UFC. I mean, how crucial would, say, a PFL grabbing her to fight like a Kayla Harrison be? I know she's expressed the desire to maybe go back to boxing to face Katie Taylor. I don't know how much steam there is now behind that with this loss, but the options are there. So I do think the possibilities are there, but I know how badly Holly Holm wants to get back to winning and holding a UFC championship. Seems like this loss really is a big hit to that, so feel bad for her in that regard. But I don't think it's as grim the future as it may seem.
Yeah, after 19 months off, man, those are some good options you threw out for her. All right, let's move on to topic number 2. Given the reaction to Holmes' loss to Viera and the claims of robbery on social media, and Daniel Cormier even assigning blame to the adjudicators of the match, do you think it was a robbery? If not, what's the biggest misunderstanding about scoring fights that made people think it was? Goes, it's on you, dog. 4 minutes.
No, I don't think that was a robbery. I think sometimes when people want to say robbery for everything, but that wasn't that. That was just a close fight. There's different ways that people interpret these rules. That's the problem. You know, we have these rules in place, but people look at them differently. They come from different backgrounds, some wrestlers, some strikers. So even amongst us, sometimes we kind of get it wrong. But the one thing that I see fans do a lot, and even fighters, is they like to use the statistics to their advantage. And sometimes it just doesn't work that way. You can't look at the total amount of strikes in a fight, and that doesn't really tell the whole story of the fight, right? Like a lot of those could have happened in round one. We judge this fight per round, right? So okay, you give that round to her, but that doesn't mean that she won all the rest of the rounds, right? Personally, I scored it for Holly. I thought it was a clear victory for her, but I didn't think it was a robbery. So I think fans, when you're trying to figure this out, you can't really use those stats to your advantage when you want to. This isn't pride. All these strikes are measured differently. Ketlen Vieira had the more powerful shots, but Holly had more of her shots, and at times I feel like she controlled the fight a little bit more. So personally, I gave it to Holly, but definitely not a robbery.
I also had a 3-2 for Holly Holm, but I did rewatch round 3, and I lean towards Viera now in that round. That seemed to be the round that was consequential. Mike Bond, share your thoughts, please.
I had it 3-2 as well for Holly Holm, but I will say, as you mentioned off the top, it was my birthday on Saturday, so I didn't watch the fight live. I watched it back Sunday, and that is after seeing, the outrage about the decision, obviously knowing who won the fight. So I don't think you could sit here and say with 100% certainty, this is how I would have scored it, in the moment. I already know the result, but I did feel Holly won. Not a robbery. Close fights are not always robberies. To me, a robbery is when you think one guy won all 3 rounds or one woman won all 3 rounds and it goes the other way. That wasn't the case here. 5 rounds in a main event or title fight case. So, I mean, obviously, MMA judging is insanely complicated. We're seeing it more and more. The criteria from state to state is different under the old unified rules, the new unified rules. There's just a lot of, uncertainty in what these people are judging and what they're counting the most. After the change in rules a few years ago, we're supposed to see more 10-8 rounds. We're not getting that as much. It's just all over the place. But I think one of the big things is how people quantify damage. I mean, that is obviously supposed to be the number one criteria, and then everything kind of descends from there. And how do you really quantify damage? I mean, yeah, we see these punches and kicks and things on TV, and they have a certain amount of pop to them. But what does it look like in there in person when you're sitting on a certain angle? How much do these things really hurt? I mean, it's so hard to qualify. This is not an easy job that these people do. It's not an easy job for us to sit home and do. And I think unless there's a massive overhaul to the system, this situation and these conversations are only going to become more common, not less common.
All right, Danny, finish things off here.
Yeah, I had it scored for Holly Holm. I didn't think it was a robbery. Unfortunately, or actually, fortunately, we don't see that many robberies in mixed martial arts. We do see a good amount in boxing, but not in MMA. Very rarely. I mean, I can't even remember the last time we saw an actual robbery in MMA. This wasn't it. This was a fairly close fight, but I did think Holly Holm was a clear winner. I scored it 48-47 for Holly, but I think there's a case to be made that she could have won that fight 49-46. I know a few people had that scoring for Holly. So the scoring on the judges, it was a little bit puzzling. It was a little bit questionable in my opinion. But I think the biggest misconception, or one of the things that I see people having issues with when it comes to scoring, is I love that we're having an open conversation about scoring. That needed to take place, and I'm glad it's taking place now. But some people are just putting way too much stock in damage. And like Mike said, how do you quantify damage? So Holly Holm lands all these shots. She does have an active offense. She is causing damage. But then Ketlen Vieira comes in and lands one bigger shot. How does that sum up, or how does that compare against smaller shots? So it's a difficult conversation to have, but I'm glad at least it's happening.
Yeah. Of the 15 scores, the judges agreed on 14 of them. Really, it was just round 3 where they differed. They were pretty consistent there. By the way, the last MMA robbery when we lost best media source last year. That's bullshit, man. I'm still steamed about that one. All right, let's go on to the next one. On the same day as the UFC Fight Night card, Anderson Silva looked pretty good in that boxing ring yet again. In fact, Jake Paul had an instant reaction afterward on social media. Needless to say, he wasn't impressed as he photoshopped himself as an exterminator ready to exterminate the Spider. Guys, is that the fight to make? How interested would you be now? Mike, get the party started. 4 minutes.
I guess just first of all, congrats to Anderson Silva. It makes me so happy to see him, getting wins like this at this age, and this post UFC run that he had when the UFC Dana White were essentially trying to get him to retire towards the end of his UFC contract there. So the fact that he's winning fights and getting these moments, I think it makes collectively media, fans, all that stuff in the MMA space happy to see that. But aside from that, the Jake Paul thing, I think it's probable, if not likely, just the fact that the timing lines up. Jake Paul has already announced this August 13th date for his next fight, but there's no opponent out there. And from what I've heard, the options are pretty slim pickings right now. I mean, I think he was hoping that there would be kind of a fuller plate of possibilities for him at this time, but doesn't really seem to be. I think the Tommy Fury one is still something that obviously sticks out there. But if you're going, kind of down that road again, they already booked that fight once before. But I think Anderson Silva has put himself in a very good position here. It's just going to be a question of, does Jake Paul and his team want to pull the trigger? Do they see the upside here? Anderson Silva is not going to engage in any promotional back and forth. There's not going to be a ton to go off in that regard. You're just going to be kind of banking on the legacy he's built in combat sports to sell that fight and the intrigue of a Jake Paul matchup. So not sure if they're going to go down that route, but I think absolutely Anderson Silva put himself in a good spot to get that fight if Jake Paul and his team want it.
Definitely. Shout out to the Spider-Man doing good stuff at age 47. Dan, you share your thoughts next on this topic here.
Yeah, it was nice to see Anderson Silva, thrive. I know it was an exhibition bout, so there was no rightful winner. But I mean, for those who saw the fight, we know that Anderson Silva pretty much kicked ass, right? And as far as Jake Paul, I think that's a great fight. I think that's a fight that makes sense for him. I like it way more than the Bisping option. I like it way more than some of these like older fighters that clearly have been retired for a while, that clearly have nothing to do in boxing, like Ben Askren or Tyron Woodley. So Anderson Silva does seem like a step up in competition, and that's what we always want with fighters, undefeated fighters, taking fights by fights, right? Just elevation in challenges. So I think Anderson Silva meets all the criteria. I understand. And Mike makes a good point about him not being a trash talker. We know Anderson Silva is very respectful, doesn't do a ton of media, and won't really go out of his way to like heavily promote this fight with Jake Paul if it does come to fruition. But it's still Anderson Silva. I mean, it's huge, right? Anderson Silva has been looking good as well. So I think just the mystery of, how would Jake Paul look against somebody as skilled as Anderson Silva, that alone will sell the fight. So I'm in. I'm all for it. What I don't want is all this banter on Twitter, back and forth, all this talk, and there not being anything remotely close to a fight, because I'm kind of sick of all the tweets, because we can go down the line. I mean, Jake Paul has targeted everyone. So look, if you're going to fight somebody, fight somebody. And if that's Anderson Silva, that's Anderson Silva. But let's make it happen if it is.
You guys have convinced me. I'm in. I want to watch this now. How about you guys?
I mean, I'd want to tune in, but I think this is a great matchup for Anderson Silva. I think it's way too early for Jake Paul to even stand against a guy like Anderson Silva. This guy, he's going to cause him a lot of problems. We've seen a lot of people fight Jake Paul. We haven't seen a lot of people box him, and I think that's what Anderson Silva is going to do. He's longer. He's a bigger cat. He still has speed and power behind his punches. So I think it would really cause him a lot of trouble. I haven't seen very many people throw a jab at Jake Paul. I think Anderson Silva is a smart fighter, and I think he's a guy that's going to really utilize a lot of boxing techniques, go to the body, go to the head. He's not just going to headhunt. I think it's a bad matchup for Jake Paul. I'll be honest. I'm not saying Jake Paul can't win, but I think he stands a better chance, and he holds all the cards of maybe putting this fight off a little bit longer, because Anderson Silva is only getting older. I would do this maybe 2 fights away, but not right now.
All right, good stuff, guys. Hey, and let's not forget, man, Anderson Silva's gone in there. He's the one of the two that's gone in there with a proper boxer. He beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., made him look like JC Shaze, whatever that guy is from Mystique instead, man. So I give him more props, honestly, boxing career-wise. Let's get to the topic number 4. Eagle FC, let's talk about that. Promoter Khabib Nurmagomedov hit us with the bombshell with his pre-fight announcement of wanting to make a Junior Dos Santos Fedor Emelianenko fight happen. But then JDS lost to Yorgan De Castro over a freak injury. However, Bellator president Scott Coker, aka the king of hashtag collaboration, he does seem interested. He according to the tweet that he put out. So anyway, what are your thoughts? Are there still thoughts on JDS versus Fedor? 4 minutes are on the clock. Danny, we're coming back at you.
Yeah, look, I still love this fight. I know that JDS suffered a defeat technically on his record. If you go and look at it online, there's an L there. But anybody watching the fight knows that JDS was en route to win a clean 30-27. I don't really remember him getting hit like hard. I mean, there was a few shots here and there, a few leg kicks, but he was never in danger against Jorgan De Castro. And yes, he suffered an injury, but it was an injury caused by himself. It wasn't the case of a, Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera where, a kick from Chito Vera causes the injury and it loses, but there's still a little bit of a sour taste or a weird feeling behind that loss for Sean O'Malley. This was 100% on JDS. He threw a punch, his shoulder popped up. That can happen to anybody. So anyone's at risk that's striking that they can pop his shoulder. So JDS, I thought he looked great. Clearly, he has a lot left in the tank. And very much like Fedor, they're in the same position. Fedor is obviously past his prime like JDS. They're clearly not the fighters that they once were, but they're also not completely washed where they have no skills or no physical abilities or no chin. Their chin still someone holds up. They definitely have the skills. They definitely have the hand speeds, and they definitely have a lot of name power and pull still in the sport. So in my opinion, that's one of the biggest fights, if not the biggest fight you can make today outside of the UFC in mixed martial arts. So yes, there's technically a loss. Ideally, you would like for him to be in a win and make this fight. But I think even with this loss against Jorgan De Castro, you can still make a very, very big fight, very entertaining fight between Fedor Emelianenko and JDS. So I'm all in. Book it.
I like it, Danny. I'm in too. How about you, Goes? How do you feel about this possible matchup?
I'm not going to lie. It's an interesting fight, but I'm not going to get my hopes up because, listen, I get it. Scott Coker is that guy. He's actually pulled off cross promotion before. If anybody's going to pull it off, it's Scott Coker. But here's what we need to know. This is Fedor Emelianenko's last fight. Scott Coker has put in a lot in Fedor Emelianenko, right? He's been a big fan. He was a big fan of Pride. He promoted him at Strikeforce. He's promoted him at Bellator. You're out of your mind if you think he's gonna just give him away and let him fight in Eagle FC. If it does happen, it's probably going to happen in Bellator. Khabib's going to have to give a little. And if that happens, well, then Bellator has to give them something back. So we got to figure out what that is. I agree with Danny. I don't think too much steam was lost because it's a loss for Junior Dos Santos. So I think you could still do that. But personally, I've always felt the fight that needs to happen is why not bring in Alistair Overeem? I mean, you can kind of have that angle of Pride versus Pride. Let him go out to that fight. If you do JDS, don't get me wrong, great matchup. I'm down. But I kind of like the Alistair Overeem fight better.
I like it too, Goes, but you may have just lost that invite to that dinner between Khabib and Scott Coker throwing out that wild card. All right, how about you, Mike? What are your thoughts here?
In a vacuum, I like this fight. It seems like a good option to me. I just don't know exactly, as kind of Goes hinted at, how realistic it is. It's one thing for Scott Coker to kind of tweet out something about a collaboration. For them to actually get all the X's and O's done to make this work, I don't know how complicated that would be. And I think timelines are important here. I don't know how long this injury is going to keep Junior Dos Santos out. Does he require surgery? All these little things. And how soon does Fedor want to fight? I mean, we've been putting off this retirement fight for a while. It was originally supposed to happen in Russia, and then obviously we know what is going on over there. So Scott Coker pulled the plug on that, and it seems like they're trying to figure out a backup, which they haven't announced. So when is that going to be? Is it going to be this summer? Is it going to be in the winter? I have no clue. So I think that's an important element of all this, of just when we're going to book Fedor. But if they can get a deal done, I like it. I mean, I think if you look around Bellator's heavyweight division, there's not one I could point out there that's particularly more intriguing unless they want to go and oblige Fedor's request that Scott Coker revealed to me late last year that he wants a rematch with Ryan Bader for the heavyweight title in his retirement fight. I think that's one we're overlooking and I think could be very realistic too.
All right, guys, you did a great job covering it. All I can think of is maybe co-promotion. Eagle FC handles the first part, and yeah, the second part, Bellator on Showtime. I think it's got to be that way. Anyway, all right, topic number 5, closing up here. Now focusing on Khabib Nurmagomedov, the retired fighter / coach. It seems like the Eagle is interested in coaching on The Ultimate Fighter versus Tony Ferguson. That got thrown out last week. Guys, at one point, sorry, this was the fight that everybody wanted to see. But since those days, again, Nurmagomedov is retired and Ferguson is on a 4-fight skid. Now, that doesn't mean that this is unappealing, though, right? What say you? Are you interested in this pairing? And one last thing here, if you're feeling froggy, you got a couple extra seconds you can spare me. Give me your take on Khabib's recent comments on comparisons to Charles Oliveira. He said a few things, but here's one quote that stood out to me. He says, Oliveira, quote, needs to defeat Islam Makhachev, Beneil Dariush, and a couple other guys. Then we can talk. Is that fair? 4 minutes are on the clock. Goes, take it away.
I think this would be a huge win for the franchise, for the Ultimate Fighter. I mean, it's kind of taken a little bit of a hit, right, with Dana White's Contender Series. I think a lot of people tune into that more than they do the Ultimate Fighter. But here's the thing that kind of scares me about all this is, in pursuit of Dana White trying to get Khabib to come back, I just think some astronomical numbers have been thrown out. And when that happens and a fighter knows how much an organization wants him, that's when things just start to get unrealistic. And I think the fighters ask for unrealistic things. And come on, if Khabib's getting something, you're going to tell me Tony Ferguson doesn't want the same. So I just think the negotiation is just going to be hell. The other part of this is normally now finally we get these two in front of each other and they're going to be going back and forth. But if you don't have that payoff of the fight, I just feel like the vibe is going to be a little different. We're just kind of not going to be into the trash talk because there's going to be no payoff at the end. So I think if it does happen, Tony's got to get in his face. He's got to every win just be jumping for joy, getting all over Khabib, and maybe he can get him to want to come out. But honestly, I don't think that's going to be what makes him come back if he does. To answer your question, George, your second part of your question, I think that's what would probably get Khabib to come out is if Islam Makhachev were possibly to lose to Charles Oliveira. I think that's when we see him. Is this comment fair? I think maybe get past one of them, but two of them I don't think is unnecessary. He's got some great wins.
Okay, yeah, Makhachev does seem to be the key for sure. All right, Mike, how about you? What do you think about these two topics?
Hard pass on the Ultimate Fighter. I mean, Tony Ferguson's out here doing interviews talking about how he needs to find a new team for himself because he, can't really handle being his own coach at this point. So I don't know why we're going to give him a crop of 8 prospects to try to mold through that show. So that's one thing. Goes hit it all. There's no payoff at the end with a fight. I don't need to watch, 10 weeks of Khabib calling Tony stupid guy and Tony just saying whatever he does. I mean, we can just move on from that. Didn't happen. It's in the past. As far as Khabib's comments on Charles Oliveira, I mean, this is a debate I think we'd need a lot more time to actually really get into, comparing legacy to legacy. But if you're saying Charles Oliveira, if he beats, Islam Makhachev, Beneil Dariush, both of them, we're having a real conversation about the best lightweight of all time. Their resumes are extremely different. When Charles Oliveira was 21 years old, he was fighting in the UFC and losing fights. Khabib was fighting guys in Russia with 2-10 records. So depends how you want to compare this. There's a lot of different elements that go into it. So Charles Oliveira grew up there. Khabib didn't. There's going to be a lot more lumps that come along the way, but look at their current form, compare the fights they have with certain guys. I think there's a discussion to be had there about who the greatest lightweight ever is, especially if Oliveira gets a couple title defenses or regains the belt and then defends it.
All right, fair enough. Danny, I'll give you the rest of the time here. What you got?
Yeah, I hate the idea of the Ultimate Fighter. First of all, Tony Ferguson is 38. We have a current season going on right now. So by the time they shoot another one and all that, I mean, it could very well be a year or so. And Tony Ferguson doesn't have that much time to waste. If he wants to stick around the sport and wants to still continue to do great things, I mean, he's kind of got to, get the work done now. So I wouldn't want to see Tony Ferguson's career be put in ice for the Ultimate Fighter without an actual fight at the end with Khabib. No thanks. Hard pass on that. I'm not into it. And as far as comparing resumes for Khabib and Charles Oliveira, it's completely fair. We all know that Charles Oliveira is the champion, all right? Might not be like the actual champion on paper because we know the weight miss and all that. But come on, we know he is the guy. We know that nobody took his belt when he fought Justin Gaethje. And so, yeah, he's still the man. And once you have the belt, it is fair to compare you against the other people that have had the belt. So I do think there is a fair conversation to be had. Great point by Mike as far as the type of opponents that Khabib had early in his career compared to Charles Oliveira. I think there's a conversation. Obviously, Khabib, I think, is leading the pack right now as far as the most dominant champion, undefeated. But he only had 3 title defenses. If Charles Oliveira goes on to beat his boy, Islam Makhachev, I think that conversation is going to get very interesting and could surpass him.
For sure. And they're both on my Mount Rushmore of lightweights, along with BJ Penn and Benson Henderson. We can discuss that another time. Guys, tremendous job as always here on the SBC. There's no UFC this weekend. There are some Cage Warriors, a little bit of love to our former partners. Cage Warriors 137, 138. Check it out. And as always, we'll keep you updated on this great sport of mixed martial arts here at MMA Junkie. And we'll catch you next week.